Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I will merely speak to the book and then dwell extensively on my readaptation of the subject matter of today's discourse as non-state actors, the imperatives of conflict transformation, and the need for a paradigm shift in the fight against terrorist insurgency and insecurity in Nigeria. I will not take too much of your time. I salute everybody here. My first task is to salute the subject matter of today's conversation, General Buratai. I salute the institution he represented, the armed forces. And in spite of the challenges of the nation state, the ups and downs of Nigeria's democratic journey, to salute the nation we're all part of. And in saluting the armed forces, there is a challenge for the political class. And I'm happy the governor of Kogi State is here, and I'm happy the minister of, of state development is here too. The challenge for the political class is that every nation has a center of gravity. It is that center of gravity that pulls together all the centripetal elements that make up a nation state that is cohesive and coherent. For the US, it is a constitution. That's why the constitution dissolves multiplicities of identities to create what they call the American citizenship. Everybody aspires to be an American, God's own country, powered by the American dream. For China, it is the Communist Party of China in a history of 100 years, from the turbulent period of Mao to the time of Deng Xiaoping in 1978 and the reconstruction of the arc of history to today, China being one of the greatest nations on earth. For Nigeria, the center of gravity is the armed forces. But the politicians can display the armed forces at the center of gravity. That means without the Nigerian army, the unity of this country is completely compromised. But maybe without the politicians, the country can move on. So the task of this democratic enterprise of journey is to ensure that the army takes even a secondary role as a nation's center of gravity. But until that is done, any student of political science, security studies, or defense studies will appreciate the role of the armed forces in sustaining the spirit and identity of the Nigerian state. That is why I commend the armed forces that the Buratai so much represented. In 1999, when we returned to civil democratic governance, many people were very apprehensive and cynical about the success of that enterprise. They felt that the Praetorian hunter mindset of the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, right through the 90s, when the last coup d'etat occurred under the watch of General Sani Abacha, that this democratic enterprise wasn't going to work. And therefore, there was no point in investing resources, time, and energy in something the army will topple over in a few months or a few years. This is 20, how many years? 23, 22, 23 years of this democratic journey. An army is completely subordinate to civil democratic authorities. And that came about as a consequence of the grand strategy of security sector reform and transformation that has worked well more in the armed forces than any other apparatus in the defense and security sector. The idea was to win the army away from the moral exhaustion through repeated coup d'etats, and to enshrine in the core of that institution the principle of that subordination to democratic control. And army have done admirably well in that direction. That is why, in spite of all the hiccups and underwhelming circumstances of our time, the army has held forth as a proud bulwark of national defense and security, maintaining the integrity of the nation's territoriality and the geography of a defined space called Nigeria. You can see what is going on in West Africa, almost as if there's an exhaustion of democratic possibilities. Coup d'etat in Mali, and yesterday or so in Burkina Faso. These are what is called warning signals that democracy is not to be taken for granted, but something to be nurtured, not as an event or even interrelated event, but as a process. and the army is watching ever vigilant like an eagle to protect the sanctity of national democratic process. Again, you can understand that the old army we used to talk about before Buratai was even commissioned was army that Fela mischievously classified as army having zombie mentality, almost like follow. But today, it makes space, and even intellectuals, that the army has not only managed to catch up with the civil sector, the intelligentsia and the academic community in terms of the depth, what I call intellectual intensity, academic depth, and breadth of strategic imagination. The Nigerian army has surpassed the civic society in that. Almost all the generals you have 2 or 3 master's degree, and many PhDs, not 1, 2, or 3. Apart from attending so many other institutions around the world, dipping not just to pull the trigger and kill, but understanding the strategic environment, understanding the geography of warfare, and even understanding political circumstances and transitions across the world. So the Nigerian army is no longer the army of the past. It's the army looking forward into the future. The final one at this beginning is the first point actually I'm making for this past few minutes. For the Nigerian army, it's been a painful curve in the struggle to understand the nature and dynamics of this asymmetrical kind of warfare imposed upon it and upon the nation. When you are trained for conventional force application, you have a defined enemy with defined uniform and insignia and a defined battlefront. It's easy to confront, overwhelm, or maybe be subjugated. But when you have an asymmetrical struggle with hybrid methods, you are not trained initially for. It's always a painful process to come to terms with that reality. So the Nigerian Armed Forces, especially under his watch, because he spent an incredible number of years as the Chief of Army's longest serving Army Chief of Staff, that understanding of the painful need to transit from a conventional force to a mobile fighting force, a flexible fighting force, was a lesson the army paid for with blood and grit and the sacrifices of the heroes who lost themselves in the line of duty. For the US, it was even a much more painful encounter, and that still persists to today. So when sometimes we in the civil side, we are very much in a hurry to put the army down, to criticize vehemently their methods of operation and so on, we must appreciate that the US and the world never saw 9/11 coming. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the procreations, Fukuyama had written The End of History and The Last Man. And Nixon, who has been rehabilitated as a former president, has told the US and the West to seize the moment in the fight against communism. So there was an air of triumphalism. When even the Gulf War ended in 1991, there was the illusion of triumph that we have conquered the entire globe, and then everybody has to become a liberal Democrat, worshiping at the feet of Pax Americana. 9/11 was a rude awakening when the planes flew from the sky and shattered the myth of American power. Today, just some months back, America crawled out of Afghanistan with a tail between their legs. Libya is a failed state because of that adventure. And Iraq is on the painful process of recovery. In a sense, the persistence of the war against terror, snubbing the efforts of a global power, the US, will tell you the challenges the Nigerian army has faced and is facing and will continue to face. So when we criticize the armed forces, we only appreciate the depth of their sacrifices, their commitment under the leadership of officers and men like Buratai. That brings me to the subject matter of this conversation. General Buratai is a consequential figure in Nigerian armed forces history, and now in diplomatic services, which means in statecraft. But he's not only a consequential figure, he's equally a controversial figure. I do not think any army chief of staff has enjoyed, in quote, this such commanding public exposure, analysis, narratives, and so on, as he has done. But I'm sure he has faced all of them with a sense of equanimity and calm resolve. So, in future, historians of the army, defense studies, and even statecraft will begin to document, not better than us now, his consequential presence in, his controversial moments, his sense of candor and commitment to the enduring varieties of the armed forces and the survival of the Nigerian state. The second point in my reflection, the book is over nearly 800 pages. So given the kind of vagaries of human existence in Nigeria and the labor required to wade through, it's not my duty to review page by page. That's an impossible task. The book is there. I'm sure it will be unveiled any moment from now. A lot has been said. The chairman has alluded to the work. The chairman of the occasion and the chairman of this of the platform that set up this historic event has equally spoken extensively about the content of the work. I too will lend a little bit of voice. But I'm sure when the book is read by you, you'll be amazed by the data assembled by the author. You'll be amazed by the painstaking effort to record even the minute details of his life. You'll be amazed by the sense of living history unfolding before you. You'll be amazed by the author's sheer understanding, almost a probing psychoanalytic understanding of the essence of the man, his moment, and institution he represented. And again, there's some chapters that are very critical. If anybody who really wants to understand where we talk about non-state actors, imperative conflict transformation, and the need for paradigm shift. Chapter 3 is very key. Buratai's professional philosophy. Very important. Then chapter 6, reforms, innovations, and initiatives. Chapter 8. Chapter 8, the partnership he has built for sustainability and interagency, coordination and networking, civilian joint task force and multinational joint, force, which helped a great deal in neutralizing some of the cells of Boko Haram and ISWAP. But broadly speaking, you find out that the book is highly engaging in drawing out the lessons, not of his life and career, as these lessons bear on the role of non-state actors using the broad methodology of conflict transformation in trying to fashion out the best national security paradigm in confronting terrorism, banditry, radical separatist insurgencies, and other new national security threats. Now, moving forward, because today's event is loaded, and I'm told that my time is running speedily. In looking at non-state actors' role, you look at what I call the limits of kinesis, or the limits of kinetic power. And what do I have here? The traditional approaches of surges in power. You have to have surges in power, force interposition, rugged military application. All these are designed to dominate an environment or war theater as a means of containing and neutralizing national security threats. The limits of all these are being noted the world over. And Nigeria is no exception. Small wonder that as forces escalate and more arms are deployed, new threats assume new dimensions, wear new looks, and adopt and embrace novel and difficult to gauge methods. We have surges. We have military application. We have new jet fighters coming in. But from Boko Haram in the northeast, we have now moved to banditry in the northwest and part of the north central. We are now dealing with a non-government phenomenon in the southeast and elsewhere. So the country is really racked by predominance of different kinds of new security threats that forces alone or kinetic measures cannot contain. So we need something much more than that. That is why ungoverned spaces are not even shrinking. They are rather exploding. But more arms are being imported. More arms are being deployed. Why? If you go through this work, you find that Buratai has done quite a bit in understanding this phenomenon, very painful phenomenon, and in deepening the interface between the military and civil society, and in strengthening and consolidating strategic partnerships and mainstreaming conflict transformation principles and methods in defense planning and military application. You find that in the book. Yet, a lot more needs to be done in this direction. Number one, an institute called the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution did a strategic conflict assessment of Nigeria in 2004. That integrative study, supported by the World Bank, EU, the USAID, and so on, must be looked into and then see how role it can play in understanding and mapping the conflict architecture in Nigeria today. Secondly, we must look at issues of early warning and early response strategies analysis of the breadth and depth of our spectrum of conflicts. People do not even bother about triggers of conflict, drivers of conflict, tempos of conflict, rhythms of conflict. These are very important. Even more important will be the conflict indicators, from oil to water resources to agriculture to land. These are some of the forces playing on, even with insurgencies and with terrorism. People do not even understand. Another one is preventive diplomacy. Yet again is third-party conciliation. I dwell a little bit here. It's part of the shortness of the time. When late President Yar'Adua decided to embrace the Niger Delta conflict, and as it were, extended his hand to bloodied hands and embraced them in the villa, people shuddered. Why will a president almost like encouraging persistence of conflict? He said, no. The only way is to leave this conflict about to Obo and the boys and girls as Nigerian citizens. And use that main methods of understanding what is going on and neutralizing those threats that damaging the economy, stopping the flow of oil, and then destroying the economy. What did he do? He started the amnesty program, and today the persistence of the amnesty program, even though sometimes it's not been tailored and been streamed to serve the purposes it was originally meant for. But today the armed forces have led the bulk of Niger Delta. Could you imagine with armed forces embedded in the Niger Delta, in the southeast, part of the southwest, in the north central, in the northwest, in the north, and so on. So when, for example, leaders from the southeast say negotiate with IPOB leader, or speak for elsewhere, we say you cannot touch somebody who wants to destroy Nigeria. When Gumi said negotiate with the bio, no, my God, Gumi is a promoter of banditry. That is not supposed to be so. A government must be bold enough to confront these challenges in a lawful manner. If you're able to find out the root causes of banditry that have become contaminated by terrorism, be able to pull some people out more, a lot more, using these non-kinetic, non-state actor-led intervention forces. Same with all the major conflicts you find across the country. And most crucially too, as Buratai's experience has demonstrated, what they have is transitional justice methods, de-radicalization, restorative justice means, and so on. Now the MC has come back again to harass the life out of me and then broken the rhythm of our conversation, but I'm sure it will continue, if not here, but elsewhere. So my final take is that these processes, some of these steps I've enumerated, they are not far-fetched, they are not time-consuming, they are not even exotic or academic in nature. They work, and they are highly impactful in the long run, and they are long-lasting as peace-building measures. First, the new paradigm I have envisaged for this country and for the armed forces is the matrix of national security that is drawn out of human infrastructure and human security, and at which stage national security becomes distinct and separable from regime preservation. Buratai's experience, as richly demonstrated in the book, is that why the kinetic approach remains a lead method in conflict neutralization, the non-kinetic method should begin to occupy a pride of place in the national defense and security doctrine. In essence, to avoid wars without end, to avoid the specter of conflicts producing and reproducing themselves in a never-ending cycles of armed purchases, arms deployment and depletion, and further arms purchases, which becomes a mix of material production of wealth, and to shrink the scale and volume of scarce national resources thrown into innumerable conflict theaters, the nation must begin to understand and underscore the limits of kinesis, the imperative of a civil society-led paradigm shift in conflict transformation, and ultimately the embrace of Buratai's innovative contributions in this sector. Thank you for listening. Your Excellency, General Buratai, retired but not tired,